fighters against low-end threats like ISIS. The Air Force doesn't have any light fighters today, so developing such a plane would require squeezing another new program into an already oversubscribed modernization agenda. That agenda currently includes plans to field a new high-end fighter, a new bomber, a new tanker, a new radar plane and a new trainer. And that's before we even get to its plans for space. The basic idea behind the light fighter, also known as a light attack plane, is that a lot of money would be saved if propeller-driven planes could be used in place of jets when fighting enemies with no air forces or air defenses. This concept first surfaced during the Iraq War, and keeps bubbling up as the service struggles to make ends meet in rapidly shrinking and aging fighter force. One of the original authors of the concept described it this way in a January essay for online journal War on the Rocks: "We wanted a turboprop power plant because they are easier to maintain than the alternative, highly resistant to foreign object damage, staggeringly fuel efficient compared to a jet engine, and precisely the proper propulsion for an aircraft that would operate from the surface to 25,000 feet. We wanted guns because they are responsive and accurate in a dynamic environment and had proved their value over and over in Iraq and Afghanistan. We wanted optical sensors and precision munitions capability like the existing fighter attack fleet. And it was pretty clear by then, 2007, that we were going to need the ability to operate from short and rough fields on a logistical shoestring to free light attack from the basing constraints of the jet aircraft." Enthusiasm for this idea apparently faded in the immediate aftermath of the US withdrawal from Iraq, but then was rekindled once Congress imposed budget caps in 2012, and so the concept was dusted off with almost no changes. The problem is that the world has changed markedly since light fighters were first conceived. Russia has turned hostile in Europe, China is claiming bases in the Western Pacific hundreds of miles from home, and client states in the Middle East are being armed by Moscow and Beijing with integrated air defenses. This is not a promising environment in which to operate a combat aircraft that depends on permissive airspace, meaning skies in which US aviators are unchallenged because their adversaries are so ill-equipped. There may still be a few places today where enemies are so primitive they can't do anything about US planes flying overhead, but what about after 2020, when the new light fighter will actually become operational? Can military planners count on any country's airspace being safe enough for such a plane? Syria presents a good test case, since taking down ISIS necessarily requires conducting air operations there. The government of Syrian dictator Bashar Assad receives military aid from Russia and Iran, both of which are capable of supplying air defenses. So while ISIS may lack sophisticated air defenses, sending vulnerable US combat planes into the fog of war that is current-day Syria could be very dangerous. The same would be true of any other war zone where prospective adversaries can deploy even one battery of surface-to-air missiles. Thus, the head of the Air Force's Air Combat Command is right when he says permissive airspace doesn't exist anymore. At least, you can't plan on it. What you can count on is that near-peer adversaries like Russia and China will increasingly.
While the US fleet has dwindled and aged, US allies have started to openly question whether the US can defend against the rising Beijing. But while China holds major advantages on paper, wars don't get fought on paper. The US military recently pulled together Valiant Shield 18, the US only follow-up to the multinational RIMPAC naval drill, which is the biggest in the world. The drill saw the US's forward-deployed USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier, 15 surface ships, and 160 aircraft coordinate joint operations, something China sorely lacks. China's Navy poses a threat with its massive size and long-range missiles, but it's unclear if China can combine operations seamlessly with its Air Force, Army, or Rocket Force. The US regularly trains towards that goal and has firmed up those skills in real war fighting. And while China has cooked up new carrier-killer missiles that no doubt can deliver a knockout blow to US aircraft carriers, everyone has a plan until they get hit. On paper, China's missiles outrange US aircraft carriers' highest endurance fighters, but this concept of A2AD, anti-access/area denial, hasn't been tested. A 2AD is sort of an aspiration. In actual execution, it's much more difficult, U.S. Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral John Richardson said in 2016. Our response would be to inject a lot of friction into that system at every step of the way, and look to make that much more difficult. In the above picture, the Reagan leads a carrier strike group full of guided missile destroyers, supply ships for long hauls, and a B-52 nuclear-capable bomber flying overhead. B-52s with cruise missiles can reach out and touch China from standoff ranges. U.S. F-15 fighter jets in South Korea could launch long-range munitions at missile launch sites before the carriers even got close. U.S. Marine Corps F-35Bs, which made their debut at this year's exercise, can slip in under the radar and squash any threats. For the missiles that do make it through the U.S.'s fingers, each U.S. carrier sails with guided missile destroyers purposely built to take down ballistic missiles. The U.S. recently completed a missile interception test with Japan, where a Japanese destroyer with U.S. technology shot down a ballistic, the first unmanned system to successfully launch and land on the deck of an aircraft carrier. Analysts have speculated that as sixth-generation developers seek to engineer a sixth-generation aircraft, they will likely explore a range of next-generation technologies such as maximum sensor connectivity, super cruise ability and an aircraft with electronically configured smart skins. Super cruise technology would enable the new fighter jet to cruise at supersonic speeds without needing afterburner, analysts have explained. As a result, Super Cruise brings a substantial tactical advantage because it allows for high-speed maneuvering without needing afterburner, therefore enable much longer on-location mission time. Such a scenario provides a time advantage as the aircraft would likely outlast a rival aircraft likely to run out of fuel earlier. The Air Force F-22 has a version of Super Cruise technology. Maximum connectivity would mean massively increased communications and sensor technology such as having an ability to achieve real-time connectivity with satellites, other aircraft and anything that could provide relevant battlefield information. The new aircraft might also seek to develop the ability to fire hypersonic weapons, however such a development would hinge upon successful progress with yet-to-be-proven technologies such as scramjets traveling at hypersonic speeds. Some tests of early renderings of this technology have been tested successfully and yet other attempts have failed. The Air Force Chief Scientist, Dr. Jeffrey Zacharias, has told Scout Warrior that the U.S. anticipates having hypersonic weapons by the 2020s, hypersonic drones by the 2030s and recoverable hypersonic drone aircraft by the 2040s. There is little doubt that hypersonic technology, whether it be weaponry or propulsion, or both, will figure prominently into future aircraft designs. Smart aircraft skins would involve dispersing certain technologies or sensors across the fuselage and further integrating them into the aircraft itself, using next-generation computer algorithms to organize and display information for the pilot. We see some of this already in the F-35. The aircraft sensor fusion uses advanced computer technology to collect, organize and display combat-relevant information from a variety of otherwise disparate sensors onto a single screen for pilots. In addition, Northrop's distributed aperture system is engineered to provide F-35 pilots with a 360-degree view of the battlespace. Cameras on the DAS are engineered into parts of the F-35 fuselage itself to reduce drag and lower the aircraft's radar signature. An S.2987 is justified and indeed overdue. There is a glaring need to take a new look at issues such as future ground vehicles that are not optimized for high-end conflict. The advantages of carrier-launched unmanned platforms over our short-legged manned Navy strike aircraft. The ways in which swarms of cheap drones can impact the United States' ability to project power. Our overstretched special operations forces. Alongside these necessary inquiries, the requested report also asks a much bigger question, whether the joint force would benefit from having one armed force dedicated primarily to low-intensity missions. The bill tells us which armed force this would be, the United States Marine Corps. The Trump administration's national defense strategy rightly seeks to reorient America's military on the most difficult task it can face, deterring or winning a large-scale modern war against a peer competitor. The Senate indeed seems guided by that same logic. The military and its civilian overseers have picked up some bad habits from the past 2 decades of low-intensity operations. At least one prominent retired general questions whether the U.S. military still knows how to fight a major war. Counterinsurgency may be eating soup with a knife, but it is not the graduate level of warfare. No matter how vexing armed anthropology and endless cups of tea may be to soldiers, the challenges of counterinsurgency and counterterrorism do not compare to those of a high-tempo, high-casualty modern war. This should be obvious to even a casual student of military history. But the post-9/11 wars have generated an enormous amount of woolly thinking among both soldiers and civilians. There are also justifiable concerns about the viability of forcible entry from the sea, the Marine Corps' traditional mission. Since the Falklands invasion in 1982, we have seen that modern missiles will make amphibious power projection increasingly costly. The Marine Corps has taken note and for decades now has quietly been renaming schools, vehicles, and probably marching bands expeditionary instead of amphibious. However, America will always be a maritime nation, and game-changing military technologies have a mixed record. Yet while the Senate's requested report is asking the Secretary of Defense many of the right questions, its one attempt at an answer should be rejected outright. A high/low mix of platforms is worth examining. Going high/low with our military services is another matter altogether. The Army and Air Force undoubtedly want to get back to preparing to fight major wars, as they should. Relegating the Marine Corps to second-tier status as a counterinsurgency and advising force, however, is not in the national interest. Militaries have historically understood that they must prepare primarily for the most dangerous and difficult operations they could face. It is far easier to shift a trained force down the range of military operations than up. The Israelis offer the most vivid recent illustration of this truth. Before the 2006 Second Lebanon War with Hezbollah, the Israeli Defense Forces had been focused on operations in the occupied Palestinian territories, with 75% of training devoted to low-intensity conflict. When this counterinsurgency force confronted well-armed, well-trained, and Dugan Hezbollah militiamen, it received a nasty wake-up call. The IDF took relatively heavy casualties and was unable to decisively defeat Hezbollah or halt rocket attacks into Israel, which continued until the day of the ceasefire. The IDF quickly returned to
$13.4 million. The U.S. Army's LRPF program aims to develop a new surface-to-surface missile that can hit point-land targets out to 499 kilometers to replace the existing Army tactical missile system. At those ranges, the new missile will be just below the threshold of weapons prohibited under the landmark Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, INF Treaty, that was signed in 1987. Which many scholars and diplomats such as former U.S. Ambassador to the Soviet Union, Jack Matlock, have argued marked the true end of the Cold War. Raytheon's Deepstrike can fire 2 missiles from a single weapons pod, reducing costs while increasing capacity. It also offers a 40% increase in range over the current ATMS. Raytheon can develop, test, and field this new capability and deliver it to the Army ahead of current expectations to replace aging weapons, Dr. Thomas Bussing, Vice President of Raytheon's Advanced Missile Systems product line, said in a statement. LRPF gives soldiers on the battlefield overmatch capability against adversaries. Under the Army's LRPF development program, the weapon's technological maturation and risk reduction phase includes testing missile components to ensure that the design is ready for engineering and manufacturing development and live-fire demonstrations by the end of 2019. If Deepstrike proves to be successful, it will offer the U.S. Army a potent new capability that in some ways is America's answer to the Russian Iskander-M ballistic missile. The Russian weapon, which replaces the OTR-23 OCAR, also known as the SS-23 Spider, that was banned under the INF Treaty, has been a thorn in NATO's side. Russia regularly rotates the nuclear-capable weapon through its Kaliningrad exclave.
Bomber that the U.S. ever built, according to the national interest. The XB-70 Valkyrie could cruise at Mach 3, riding its own shock wave to do so, and could hit altitudes of 70,000 feet. But the XB-70 Valkyrie never went into full-scale production, and now there's only one left in the world, sitting on display at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. The XB-70 was developed in the 1950s to outrun enemy interceptors and air defenses, but ended up being doomed by the birth of surface-to-air missiles. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy scratched the XB-70 as an actual bomber program, but the aircraft continued to fly for research purposes until February 1969. The first XB-70 Valkyrie built, the XB-70A, had handling at speeds greater than Mach 2.5, and only got above Mach 3 once. So a second one was built, the XB-70B, with the wings adjusted just 5 degrees, which helped handling. The XB-70B flew for the first time in July 1965. transmission in before we get those blades on," Tobin explained. Depending upon ultimate requirement established by the Army and DoD, Bell expects to engineer an attack variant of the aircraft with a slightly different fuselage configuration. An armed attack version will have a gun, 2.75 unfolding fin rockets and some type of point-to-point missile, Hellfire or some later generation missile that would guide off of a laser or IR. "We are being open-ended in that we are not designing any specific requirement," Tobin explained. The V-280 Valor next-generation tiltrotor aircraft for the 2030s includes the integration of a high-tech 360-degree sensor suite quite similar to the one used on the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter called a Distributed Aperture Systems, or DAS, developers explained. Instead of having sensors mounted to the turret, you have sensors that are mounted to the aircraft, so essentially you have sensors staring in 360 degrees around the aircraft at any given time. Those images are stitched together so it appears as one continuous image to the pilot. Both pilots can make use of the same system, Tobin said. This technology will also allow troops riding in the back of the aircraft to wear goggles or a helmet giving them a view of the surrounding sensor feeds as they transit to a mission, Tobin added. The Northrop Grumman-built DAS system will also form the basis of a small arms enemy fire detection technology which will search for and locate the signature of incoming enemy attacks. The sensors will be able to discern the location and heat signature coming from enemy small arms fire, giving the aircraft an opportunity to quickly attack with its weapons, lowering risk of injury to the pilots, crew and passengers. The new Bell tiltrotor, called the V-280 Valor, is part of the Army's Joint Multi-Role Technology Demonstrator program aimed at establishing requirements and paving the way toward a new future vertical lift aircraft designed to meet a wide range of new requirements. The concept behind the Army's Joint Future Vertical Lift program is to engineer a forward-looking, future aircraft able to reach airplane speeds and yet retain an ability to hover and maneuver like a helicopter. The aircraft will have an ability to come to a hover in challenging conditions and then, while at a hover, operate at low speeds with maneuvering capability to roll and yaw. We wanted to have the handling perspective to make the aircraft able to do what it is able to do, Tobin added. The V-280 Valor will also have yet to be determined degraded visual environment technology that allows sensors to see through obscurance such as brownout conditions, bad weather and other impediments to navigation. Part of this will also include a system called controlled flight into terrain wherein an aircraft has an ability to quickly reroute itself if it is approaching a dangerous obstacle such as a mountain, rock wall or building structure. The new attack variant is expected to use a modernized or next generation of existing Apache sensors and targeting systems called the Modernized Target Acquisition Designation Sight/Pilot Night Vision Sensor, or MTADS PVS. When it comes to sensors and mission equipment, Bell engineers are building a tiltrotor aircraft with what is called open architecture, meaning software and hardware able to quickly integrate new technologies as they emerge. The concept is to construct a helicopter that is not intended to operate today but rather advance technology well into the 2030s and beyond. Therefore, it will need to anticipate the weapons, sensors, computer processors and avionics likely to emerge by the 2030s. This will likely draw upon a semi-autonomous navigation technology built into the aircraft known as fly-by-wire. Bell Helicopter developed the initial algorithms for this technology, which is also now on the V-22 Osprey. Another survivability technology potentially slated for the aircraft is a system known as Common Infrared Countermeasure, or CIRCM. CIRCM is a lighter-weight variant of an existing technology which uses a laser jammer to throw incoming enemy missiles off course, therefore protecting the aircraft. We are looking to the DoD customer to see what they want. Either way we can get that on the airplane, Tobin explained. Bell Helicopter has now attached the wing to the fuselage of the new tiltrotor aircraft engineered to reach speeds of 280 knots, fly for 800 kilometers on one tank of fuel, hover and maneuver in high-hot conditions and function as both a utility and attack helicopter platform. The intention is to build an advanced, high-tech tiltrotor demonstrator